And welcome. Let's begin with our top story. A ripple effect from the war in West Asia could be felt thousands of miles away in Africa. The wealthy Gulf states have been dragged into the war between US-backed Israel and Iran. Tehran has launched retaliatory attacks on Washington's allies in the region. Behind closed doors, Gulf leaders are urgently re-evaluating their strategy as the conflict escalates. According to media reports, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar are weighing the staggering costs of a prolonged regional war. The war has disrupted energy supplies through the Strait of Hormuz. It is a crucial waterway through which a fifth of the world's oil and gas passes. Qatar has suspended the production of liquefied natural gas after a drone attack on its main LNG plant.
All right, welcome to This Week in Africa, your weekly live stream where we review all things Africa related. There are a number of stories we'll be going over today, and specifically, we will be continuing the discussion around the disruption across the continent based on this war between the United States and Iran and other parties. But before we get into today's stories, we like to start with introductions. So I'll turn it over to my co-host before I introduce myself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Gloria Ayo. I am the founder of Diaspora Station, where we basically bring talk about things that affect Africans in Africa and throughout the diaspora, from a cultural, historical, current affairs angle, whatever you will, whatever you're interested in, we got. But I do enjoy, the ability to actually analyze current affairs with Joe Hotagwa every week. So definitely happy to be back.
All right. And I'm Joe Hotagwa, the founder of Authentic African. What we do is we help people visit, move, and invest in Africa. And so we spend a lot of time talking about the news of the day on the continent because it's important to know what's happening in the place that you might be moving, visiting, or investing in. So we meet every Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time to have these discussions. So we are a little late today, and that's on me. It's been a busy week this week. So I appreciate you all joining and being involved in the conversation. Please feel free to comment. Let us know what you think of the stories as we go through each one and we talk about what we see as the impact on the continent. And then, of course, share your thoughts and your opinions as we go along. And let us know, of course, if you guys can hear all the videos. Give us a thumbs up if you can hear us and you can hear the videos as we go through the stories. So specifically, the stories today is really we're talking about, the U.S.-Iran war crippling basically the continent of Africa. Billions lost, 16 billion in gold trade risk, fuel shortages, as we kind of alluded to in the opening video, and a number of other stories from the U.S. sanctioning Rwanda, African Lens platform being shut down, which Gloria will speak to that a little bit, and then the Mehdi Hasan interview, viral political interview, and then also Sudan accusing Ethiopia of allowing drones to be launched from its territory. Then there's some news from around the continent that we will review. So before we get back into today's stories, just a little context for what's been happening in East Asia or West Asia, excuse me, and how it's been impacting the continent of Africa. So as was mentioned in that video, the US-backed Israel and Iran war is intensifying. The shockwaves are reaching far beyond what we now are calling West Asia, threatening to derail Africa's economic future. So we mentioned the close of the Hormuz Strait, which obviously is a major fuel production pipeline and really is where a number of African countries get their fuel. So we'll speak to that. There's also implications in gold trade and investment on the continent. What I do think is important, though, is to talk about how it impacts Africa, right? Because so many people are talking about the war, and you know, obviously there's tons of loss of life in the region, and you know, obviously our thoughts and prayers are with the families there. But because this live stream is about the continent of Africa, we do want you all to know how it could impact you as you're deciding if you want to move, visit, or invest on the continent. As of right now, travel to the continent has not been halted generally. So people in many places are traveling to the continent, at least from the United States and in other parts of Europe. I think where the challenges are is if, you know, you have to fly through the Middle East, that's where it's been disrupted. And we will at some point look at flights and things like that and see how that's impacting things. But okay, we heard a little bit about the general impact. We do want to jump into the disruption, the airspace closing, threatening the $16 billion gold trade in Ghana. So if you guys aren't aware, Ghana's gold industry, valued at billions, faces, threats due to the conflicts that are happening in West Asia, right? Because it's disrupting air travel, particularly to Dubai, a major refining hub. So one of the things that we talk about all the time on the continent is that we take our raw minerals, send them somewhere else to be refined. This is an example of the disruption in the pipeline for gold trade, because the continent of Africa doesn't refine the gold enough itself, and it gets refined elsewhere. Dubai is one of the major refining hubs. So airlines have reduced flights, creating uncertainty for gold shipments. So Ghana State Agency Goldbod is preparing backup plans as air traffic declines, prioritizing emergency cargo over gold. So currently shipments do continue, but ongoing disruptions from many or may force Ghana to explore alternative routes like India or China, potentially increasing its cost, obviously because of the distance it would have to travel versus Dubai. So we will play a video and have some commentary on the other side.
Now, Ghana's gold industry is worth billions of dollars, but the war in West Asia is now threatening that supply chain. The conflict is disrupting the airspace around one of the world's biggest gold trading hubs. For years, much of Ghana's gold has been flown to Dubai for refining. But the ongoing conflict involving the United States, Israel, and Iran has disrupted air travel across the region. Drone threats and military activity have forced airlines to reduce flights. That is now creating uncertainty for countries that rely on these routes to move valuable cargo. Ghana's state gold trading agency, Goldbod, says that it is preparing backup plans. For now, shipments are still moving, but officials warn that if airspace disruptions continue, Ghana may have to reroute its exports. The concern is simple. Most of Ghana's small-scale gold production is exported through Dubai for refining and trade. If flights slow down, the gold cannot reach the market. And that could hit one of Ghana's most important sources of foreign currency. The pressure is already visible. Air traffic through Dubai has reportedly dropped sharply as airlines avoid conflict zones. Priority is being given to passengers and emergency cargo like medicine. And because of that, high-value shipments such as gold could face delays.
All right. So your thoughts, Gloria, on the disruption to the potential gold market, well, the potential gold market disruption and some of the delays that they're discussing here.
Yeah, so Ghana has a $16 billion gold industry. That is huge. For years, Ghana has served as a primary global hub for refining and trading Ghanaian gold. But as we can all see now, this conflict has turned that the regional airspace into a danger zone. So airlines are now being forced to reduce the flights, to prioritize emergency cargo over these shipments that obviously have a lot of value. The bottleneck, the logistical bottleneck, everyone can see how this is now threatening gold, which is one of Ghana's most vital sources of foreign currency. And officials are now scrambling for backup plans. You know, they're considering alternative routes to refining centers in India, maybe China. But all that, even that alternative plan is going to come with increased transportation and insurance, which could actually diminish the returns on this gold. So that, even that is not necessarily guaranteed to, you know, bring them profit, at least not the profit, not the scale at which they were profiting prior. But there is an irony here that I think may have a blessing. I mean, obviously, the first one is the fact that our officials, our government officials, need to really prioritize trading regionally, trading continentally, instead of taking things out of the continent. You know, this is an opportunity. And this is why, you know, Joe, we've hammered on this several times, why we need to prioritize creating infrastructure that will enable us to trade among ourselves first. I'm not saying we can't have partnerships outside the continent, but when we prioritize ourselves, every single country in Africa, I don't care which country, I don't care if it's landlocked, I don't care if they have a lot of drought, every single country in Africa has immense potential. Now imagine if our leaders begin to prioritize shipments among ourselves. You know, they say a priest has, or a pope has no honor in his own home, or a priest. We have seen ourselves finish, as we like to say in Nigerian parlance. You know, like, oh, it's just Togo. I don't need to do anything. Togo has nothing to offer me. Let me keep my eyes on those big countries outside the continent. That's what you think. But just imagine when we start understanding that under the ground, each country in Africa is far wealthier than these countries you run to. Once we start having that mindset shift, we will see the potential of Africa. And when things like this happen, black swan events like this happen, we know we have one another. We know the continent is still solid. It's not that we will not be affected, but to a large extent, the continent will be taken care of. Another opportunity that I see here, when we're talking about informal channels, you know, when we're talking about smuggling networks, now because of what's going on in the Middle East, they actually get affected. So hopefully more formal channels are able to thrive, and this will force that gold trade into these formal channels, and these informal channels, you know, remain on the back burner, as opposed to just all this smuggling that's happening to Dubai and all these countries that, you know, throughout the continent.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And to your point, we do need to be more self-sufficient. So there's some comments and some questions about if and when Africa will get there. And, you know, I think things like this will probably force Africa's hand, right? I mean, we saw that, you know, obviously the stoppage of aid to the continent in large part, many of the NGOs on continent have had to find alternative ways to raise funds. There's been, you know, alternative means for shipping of these things. Now, what we have seen is, at least in terms of fuel, there's been the refining of fuel happening in Nigeria, right? Nigeria's government actually opened a refining plant, an old one that had been closed in the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. And then, of course, Dangote, so on the private side, had done the same. That's still not enough for the entire continent, not even for the country or the region. So, you know, it looks like, you know, Africa's moving in that direction, kind of being forced to, slowly but surely. But it's going to take a while for the continent to move into the world of manufacturing the same way that China has. I think China did a good job of doing that throughout the 80s and the 90s. Then they become kind of the hub for global manufacturing for a number of different things. And I think, you know, I'd love to see Africa get there, but I think also a big part of it is all of us educating ourselves, and those who have those skill sets, bringing those to the continent. It's going to require human capital like us, and not depending on governments, because governments move slow. And we've just, I mean, from what we report on here, we know that it's an unlikely scenario in the near future. It's going to require people. Now, of course, you sometimes need incentives from governments, but I think overall we all benefit from doing so. The reason why refining needs to happen on the continent is because refined goods, you can charge a whole lot more for them than you can for the raw goods themselves, right? And so, you know, I think that that's an obvious need, and we're not there yet, but I think we're kind of being forced in that direction. Now to moving on to the concept or the conversation around fuel, specifically the escalating war in between US, Israel, and Iran actually is having an impact in East Africa as well, as they're bracing for a severe energy crunch. Nairobi is currently tracking a critical fuel tanker that was scheduled to load in the Red Sea, a shipment vital to a nation that lacks domestic refining capacity and relies almost exclusively on Gulf imports. So the conflict has effectively paralyzed the Strait of Hormuz, as you guys know, because it's been shut down, driving up oil prices and forcing many vessels to undertake costly routes around the Cape of Good Hope. While Kenyan regulators insist current strategic reserves can buffer the immediate shock, experts warn that prolonged instability poses an existential threat to the region's economy. So with the port of Mombasa serving as a lifeline for Kenya's neighboring countries, including Uganda and South Sudan, excuse me, the successful arrival of the tanker is no longer just a local concern. It really does concern a number of different countries. So we will play this video and have some commentary on the other side.
Has choked off energy supplies, driven up rates of oil and gas, and it has the entire East Africa region on edge, especially Kenya. As Africa prepares for fuel supply shocks, Nairobi is cautiously tracking a fuel tanker expected to load in the Red Sea. It will be carrying petroleum products from West Asia. Now, according to a media report, Kenya has said that if the scheduled cargo does not load due to the ongoing war, authorities will be concerned. Now, why is this so critical? It is because Kenya lacks fuel production facilities and it relies almost exclusively on the Gulf for refined petroleum. Nairobi sources fuel through government-to-government deals with national oil companies in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. Fuel tankers coming from West Asia must navigate the Red Sea to reach the port of Mombasa. The port serves as the primary energy hub for not just Kenya, but also for Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Tanzania, South Sudan, Somalia, and Ethiopia. So this is not just about a single fuel tanker. It's about how the war between the US, Israel, and Iran has put Africa in a tight spot.
All right, we will leave it there for now. Gloria, your thoughts on the fuel shortages and the potential, even though as was mentioned, there is oil reserves, but obviously that's limited and it's not, it's not available in perpetuity. So your thoughts on the impact on not just Kenya, but as you mentioned, as mentioned in that video, all of the countries in the region.
Yeah, and of course, the Kenyan government, as you pointed out, has assured the public that strategic reserves are sufficient until April. But there is a psychological and economic toll that's already mounting. I mean, we cannot deny the fact that just psychologically, I mean, nobody wants, when you're talking about fuel, the importance of fuel, I mean, I'm Nigerian by heritage, and a country like Nigeria, we know that when fuel is pricey or when fuel is unavailable, it affects a ton of things because we don't have good power supply to begin with. But back to Kenya, the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority is navigating what you call a hard market, where reinsurance costs for tankers entering the Indian Ocean spiked due to the proximity of the conflict. And we have a multiplier effect as a result, because if it costs more to insure a ship, it costs more to transport the fuel, which eventually manifests as higher prices for super petrol and diesel in Nairobi. And it's not just a transport issue. And now I want to speak across the continent. As I said earlier, fuel prices dictate the cost of everything, from the electricity used in manufacturing to the irrigation pumps on small scale farms. I mean, we what comes to mind is, you know, an incident that happened in 2008 and even 2022, where we had global price spikes. And as a result of this, we had high inflation, we had suppressed GDP growth. So what's happening in Kenya, that, you know, Kenya's stance has always been the government to government deal with Gulf suppliers. And now with what's going on with Saudi Aramco, Qatari facilities themselves, now they're all coming under drone fire, even with these bilateral agreements that were in place. But those agreements are now being tested. But I think most importantly in all of this, and it goes back because I'm always, or at least I like to be solution driven. This is all about energy sovereignty. The fact that countries across Africa, such as Nigeria, the so-called giant of Africa, a country like Ghana, a country like Kenya, Egypt, the fact that oil producers are still facing fuel hikes because they lack sufficient domestic refining capacity is actually what really needs to be focused. This is the conversation we need to be having across the continent.
100%. And you're seeing some of this already today. I've heard prices as high as $6 per gallon in countries like Sierra Leone, you know, where all of its fuel is imported, right? There is no domestic fuel production in any way. So not coming out of the ground, not refined, all imported. So you know, this has large scale impacts. And to your point too, especially in countries that have sporadic electricity, many people use backup generators as a way to keep electricity going. That requires the same kind of fuel you put into a motor vehicle. So that now reduces the amount of electricity that people will be able to have when there already is, you know, electrical shortages across the continent. So we do anticipate seeing broader impacts and effects on the continent as time goes on. So, you know, I mean, as mentioned earlier, you know, there's a lot of questions about why don't we refine this ourselves, and that's the hope for outcome of something like this, that people begin to think through how we can refine on the continent ourselves and not be so reliant on you know, on you know, external imports. The thing is that in terms of oil, I don't know enough about the amount of oil produced on the continent that it can that it's enough to be able to supply the entire continent. There are many countries that import oil, many large ones, including the United States, which has large oil reserves in oil itself, refines it itself, etc. It still also gets it many times from other places. And so, you know, it really depends on your usage, right? And the continent is very big. And I think that, you know, I think another challenge with the continent of Africa is much of it, the oil refineries, not the refineries, but the oil, yeah, the fracking and the way oil is being procured is mostly done by private companies, not African owned. So even that's still going to be a challenge, right? In Nigeria, you have major African brands, but across the continent, you have many European and US brands that are involved in the oil extraction from the ground. So it'd be very hard even to refine it anyway on the continent. So there are many challenges involved in getting to be more self-sufficient in the oil sector. Yeah, I think that that's something that we'd love to see, but there are many steps that have to happen in the meantime. And I think it's going to require a lot of thought and really, you know, really serious effort by those who have knowledge and understanding of this process, who can, you know, help to begin to transfer that knowledge, and then, you know, obviously make some adjustments. Now with that, sorry, I'm getting a call from my lawyer, so it's just a little distracting. Court cases in Africa are not fun. Okay,
Yeah.
so we'll move on to sanctions potentially coming from the United States to Rwanda over what is being said that M23 rebels Rwanda's involvement with them in Congo as the war escalates. So, you know, Central Africa in this peace deal that was supposedly brokered by the United States between Rwanda and DRC has run into some speed bumps. So Rwanda's military is now being accused of undermining the Washington Accords aimed at reducing violence in Eastern Congo. So 4 senior Rwandan officers have also been sanctioned, freezing assets and cutting off financial access. The U.S. alleges that Rwanda supported M23 rebels, enabling their capture of cities like Goma. Rwanda denies these claims, citing national security. The conflict has resulted in significant displacement with over 8 million people affected, while U.S. interests focus on securing access to critical minerals in the resource-rich region amidst broader global competition. So as you guys know, the U.S. has recently brokered what was called a peace deal. I think there was a little bit of speculation as to how long this would last, but it was, you know, signed at the White House. If you guys remember, we covered this story previously. There were a lot of viral moments from those conversations, if you guys might remember, with the news reporter, etc. But we were watching closely, and here's the update. So we'll play this video and we'll have some commentary on the other side.
Donald Trump has branded himself as president of peace, but in Central Africa, a peace deal brokered by him is now under strain, and his administration now turning the heat on a partner it has backed for years. The United States has imposed sanctions on Rwanda's military, accusing it of undermining an agreement meant to calm fighting in eastern Congo. 4 senior officers have also been placed under sanctions. Now, the measures freeze any US-based assets and cut them off from the dollar-based financial system. Washington says the Rwandan military supported and fought alongside the M23 rebel group in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo. According to the US Treasury, the M23 would not have captured key cities such as Goma and Bukavu without Rwandan backing.
All right. So your thoughts on this, Gloria?
Yeah. Let's talk about the Washington Peace Accords that was signed just months ago in December 2025. We've covered this. We've covered, you know, the relationship between Washington and Rwanda and all the deals that have been signed with Congo present. Sometimes we've talked about all, you know, we've covered it every single time it's been in the news. And this deal, the one that happened in December 2025, came with a lot of fanfare by the Trump administration. It was supposed to be the end to the M23 insurgency. And only days after the ink had dried, the Rwanda-backed M23 forces captured the strategic city of Uvira, which is near the Burundi border. And this was the final straw for Washington. The sanctions are now targeting the very architects of Rwanda's regional strategy. We're talking about the Chief of Defense Staff, the Army Chief of Staff, and some specialized commanders. By freezing their assets and barring any transaction with the RDF, the US is basically attempting to cut the logistical tail that feeds the M23. And it's all very ironic because at the end of the day, it's about Africa's resources. The M23 currently controls the Rubaya mines, which is actually the world's most significant source of tantalum, coltan, that's used in every smartphone and electric vehicle on the planet. Critics are now arguing that while the US is sanctioning the military, it's also signing letters of intent with Rwandan mining companies to secure supply chains. And at the end of the day, what happens to the Congolese in all of this? There's a huge after effect that on a global scale is not being talked about enough. We have a landscape of human wreckage. Millions have been displaced. There have been summary executions. There's been systemic looting of sovereign wealth. So now it's about Rwanda, or rather it's about Congo. We know Rwanda, you know, there's still remnants of what happened in 1994. And for Kigali, Rwanda. This is justifying what is happening in Congo. Well, anyway, the US has actually signaled that this narrative, this security narrative, can no longer be used as a blank check for territorial expansion. But my big question to the US is intent. Is it only about resources, or are you truly concerned with bringing peace to the world? After all, some people have nominated you for the Nobel Peace Prize, dear President Trump. Is this about peace, or is it about resources? Which one is it? Or are you going to say two things can be true?
Yeah, and I'll say historically, right, the United States has used peace as a way to describe their involvement in other places. I will leave it at that in terms of that particular topic. But as far as the conflict itself, obviously there's been continuous denials by Rwanda in terms of training the M23 rebels, right? There's been all kinds of third-party groups have reported on this throughout the years. We've talked about this on many occasions. There is a lot of pretty credible evidence to the fact that they, are allegedly tied to M23. I don't think that most people around the world at this point even deny that fact. There are people who do, but generally, I think people are pretty much under the belief system that it is Rwanda backed. We do know that the president of Rwanda himself, Kagame, did say that majority of the minerals legally or illegally coming out of the DRC come through Rwanda, or a significant amount of them. And what he said maybe about 2 years ago was, don't point the finger at Rwanda, point the finger at the end destinations where it's going. He mentioned Europe, he mentioned Australia, he mentioned other parts of the world. And so at the very least, it's clear that from their perspective, they know that it's coming through their country legally or illegally. The question is how it's getting there and their involvement in the process, which I think, all reports lead to the fact that they are heavily involved. Although we had our doubts of whether or not this peace treaty would stand or stay, as many don't really last that long, we were hopeful. And unfortunately, of course, as you mentioned, almost immediately after, there was, more agitation, and it continues. We will see if sanctions have any impact whatsoever. They tend to not often have that big of an impact, but we'll see. We'll see. I mean, at this point, I think there's not much you can do to kind of stop it. It's already gone this far, right? They've already taken over major cities in the DRC, many major regional areas. It's very tough to sanction a few people in one country when the other country has already been taken over by these folks. And many areas of this country, another country has been taken over by some of these folks. So, we'll see. We'll see if these sanctions have any impact. We will continue to follow this story as we have been throughout the years. And we will keep you guys posted. All right. In the interest of time, I know we have a couple more stories that we want to definitely cover. Next of which is African Lens. So much like African Stream, unfortunately, the platform African Lens has been banned, at least from Instagram, and we'll speak to Gloria and where else they've been banned. But Gloria had started collaborating with them very early in their journey, and obviously we've all watched them grow. I also did some collaborations with them as well. They have asked to be followed on X. But Gloria, let me turn it over to you to maybe speak to your relationship with African Lens and what you've been, what insight you've been given after speaking to them.
Thank you so much, Joe. And thank you for always using your platform to shine a light on things going on the continent, whether or not they're necessarily some stories don't make mainstream news, but you don't prioritize your stories based on what is trending and what is not. You prioritize based on what is important to be talked about on the continent. So thank you so much, Joe, for that. I took particular interest in African Stream. I literally saw, and of course African Stream, but in African Lens, I saw them, my discovery when we first started interacting, they probably had about 300 followers. But I saw their potential. I saw the layout of their page. I saw their editing style. I saw the stories they were covering. And I said, this is an important page. You know, when we're talking, we can never have too many comrades when it comes to African stories, because our stories, as I keep saying, are the most suppressed. Our stories, ironically, are the darkest, and they are the most suppressed. Our stories are the ones that people, I'm having goosebumps. Our stories are the stories that people insist are not that important, and they need to be forgotten, and they need to be wiped out. So when we see platforms like Authentic African or African Lens, these are very important platforms, because these are the megaphones that Africa needs. There's so many things about Africa that even Africans don't know about themselves. There's so many stories. So to have a platform like African Lens was very exciting, and they did good work. In such a short time, they grew in leaps and bounds. I saw the people who were interacting with their page. Caesar, the singer Caesar. I mean, you had high-level celebrities, global celebrities interacting with their page. That's the kind of reach they had, you know? And for that to have just been wiped out overnight, I mean, it gave PTSD, because you think about like African Stream and what happened to them. And they're everywhere. They've been banned everywhere except X. Now, as far as the specifics of what happened, maybe because all they know is that they were banned. I mean, some people would interpret that as suppression, again, of our stories. Based on what we saw, Joe, you've accepted collaborations from them, and I know you don't accept collaborations just to accept them. You do your due diligence, as I do, or at least I try to. I didn't get a feeling of, this page is too risky, they're going to get banned. It never crossed my mind. So while wondering what could have happened to cause this ban, and of course, this takes us to the broader conversation of why Africans also, we need our own platforms. We need to keep doing what we can to tell these stories. I mean, for now, we don't have a choice, really. We have to use, you know, what platforms are being presented, but I know there are some alternate platforms that are being created. And I'm not here to say boycott any platform. I'm just saying we do need alternate platforms where perhaps what's being put out is not being suppressed or seen as offensive or anything like that. But in the meantime, I ask everyone, please go follow African Lens on X. They're still doing their good work there. And I'm so sorry, African Lens, because this has to be really, really hurtful. But like I said to them, it's not the end. It could actually be the beginning of something bigger.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, look, this is something that has been a concern of mine for a while, because I had gone live with African Stream for, I don't know, almost a year, a little over a year. And we stopped and started again because they had, they had also been threatened. And then, of course, they were removed from the internet. I had been doing some collaborations with African Lens. So, this is a very, very big concern, even of mine. And so that is why, I've started this process of building out an email list for folks to be able to have direct communication with us, and that we can communicate directly with you all. To Gloria's point, of course, we do need our own platforms. But one of the things that, because that conversation comes up all the time, right? Why don't we build our own platforms? Why don't we build our own platforms? People ask that every time they see something like this. The challenge with that is regardless of what your interests are, everybody's on the large platforms. And so it is the easiest place to reach the broadest audience with your message. There are, number 4 billion people or something like that on Instagram and Meta all together and all these platforms. Meta, Facebook, Instagram, and Threads, something like that, around 4 billion, 5 billion. I don't know what the number is total.
That's like half of the world.
Yeah. And so, if that many people are there, the opportunity to reach people is there. Our own platforms require us to support them, right? And so not enough of us support those platforms for us to only be on those platforms. And so, I'm on other smaller platforms. And look, the size of the audience is just much smaller. And so, of course, we support all platforms, especially all the smaller ones who are all doing their thing, fan base and others. I hear good things. But until more of us use those platforms as a primary source or a secondary source for our information, insight, etc., until then, most of us have to build on these larger platforms in order to reach broader audiences. One, to get in front of more people, and two, in order to generate any income from the processes that you have in place. So there is a question about where people can go to sign up for the email list, and that is a good point. I will just put the link here. It's my Go High Level opt-in form. I'm going to put it in the chat, and then I'll also put it in the description. I don't know if you guys can copy and paste this from the chat. Let me know if you can. But it'll also be in the YouTube description, Facebook description, well, YouTube description. So go over to YouTube to check this video once it's done. But that's the link there. So you guys can just click on that link. That'll take you to the form. You can fill that out, and we will be message you every time a YouTube video comes out, on news, etc. I mean, I'm still working on building out the newsletter itself, and I will continue to kind of nurture this list and continue to work on sharing this with folks. But if you're interested in not being specifically held only by being on this platform, then definitely sign up for the list. This was something that I started working on a couple of weeks ago because you know, the platform is growing tremendously, and we appreciate all of you being there. I think we've reached a little over 1 million people across all platforms, which is great, but also at the same time, that can go away at any time. You know, African Stream was at 3 million people in 2 years. And so that is a concern of mine, of course. And so, and I didn't want to make this about me. So this conversation was about African Lens. But I just want to say that this is why we're doing this, right? It's so that, you know, we just don't know. We want to have more control, right? And so, you know, it's a double-edged sword having to use a platform the size of Meta to get your story out there, and TikTok, and, you know, X, and you know, Alphabet or Google. You know, we're everywhere, right? But you know, we also know that any of those platforms at any time can take away this audience, and so we're working to try to build that outside of social media. So I hope that African Lens is able to rebrand and come back, and also find out what exactly happened, because to your point, I'm not sure what exactly happened. And you know, obviously I've gone through the process of you know, verifying my platform and asking questions anytime I lose access to something, because I will tell you, there's been 4 times in the last 2 years that I've lost access to be able to go live on Instagram, and was not given a reason as to why. But once, you know, you paid for the platform, you know, you pay for this blue check mark, and you can email someone and ask them what is happening. Generally, it's been reinstated when I email from another page, but you know, it is something that can go away at any point in time. And so I'm aware of that. So excited to hit a million, but also know that it's possible that can go away at any time. So yes, I'll leave it at that. But you know, thank you guys for the support so far, and we are working to get people off of these platforms somewhere else so that we can continue conversations with you guys. Okay, one last story before we go. Before I go, I don't know, Gloria, do you have time to stay around and do some of the rest of the stories?
Sure.
Okay. I just realized the time, so I was rambling for a little bit, so I apologize, guys.
It's okay. No, what's important info? It's okay.
So with that, I do want to jump to the story here. This was an interesting story, and this one is particularly about the government of Nigeria. I'll just play the video because I think Gloria does a good job of introing it. So I will play the video, and then we'll give some commentary on the other side.
People's lives, and you're going to bring out a glass of water. There is no government on earth more difficult to defend than the Nigerian government. Watch to see what I mean.
Are you okay with having the Americans bomb Nigerian people's homes?
I'm not aware of that one.
Are you telling us that Nigerian citizens are lying about
No,
being
no,
bombed
no,
by
no.
the
I
US?
am saying that
Wow.
the military operation that was conducted on that day was targeted as terrorists, and we'd hit them.
You have a history of not hitting terrorists and hitting civilians.
I'm not aware.
Well, on December 21st, Nigerian Air Force said that they handed over compensation to people who were hit in an accidental airstrike on Christmas Day 2024. Do you just bomb every Christmas?
Dispute that fact.
Take it up with the Nigerian Air Force.
You're
Let me
welcome.
ask you this. Since President Tinubu came to office in 2023, the situation has worsened in your country.
We also have
now-
a portion of foreign interest in Nigeria.
Nigeria is now the 5th deadliest country in the world. Are you proud of that record?
I acknowledge the fact that we have insecurity in Nigeria
Actually, the number of deaths went up on the president's watch.
after this incident of a Christian genocide. There is no country of the world today that is free from insecurity.
No,
there
I
are
agree.
parts of London
That's why-
here
that's why
you
I
can't
asked-
go in the evening.
That's okay, but we're not bombing London to root out militant training camps.
But you have had so many of the bombing on behalf of the
Let's
United
just
Kingdom
put this
by
in
the United
context here,
States.
since you're making rather spurious
No,
comparisons.
no, the context is
11,000 people were killed in conflict in Nigeria in 2025. That is up from 8,700 in 2023. That is a 26% increase. That's a pretty awful record.
That's why we are cooperating with the United States of America. Since 9/11, terrorism is a global phenomenon.
Agreed. But it's getting worse in Nigeria. That's the problem.
I can't say it is getting worse.
You just agreed with me when I gave you the number.
How many people were killed in the United States last year?
In conflict-related violence.
So
Probably
this is not
one,
a conflict. This
11,000.
this is part of what Donald Trump many years ago in his first time classified the Western media as what fake news. The reason is because context matter.
This is not Western
No,
media. I
terrorist
could also
attack.
give
You
you
know
another
that an
source.
outcome?
National Human Rights Commission. This is a
Right.
Nigerian group. 2,266 people were killed by bandits or insurgents in the first half of 2025. That's more than were killed in all of 2024. Amnesty International says you are failing at security. The numbers don't lie. And it's
To deal
getting
with that
worse.
situation. I don't agree to the fact that it's getting
How
worse.
can it not get worse if more people die in 1 year than the previous year?
Context matters.
What's the context?
The context is not getting worse.
What?
Yes.
The context is not getting worse.
The context is that it is not getting worse because this is a water.
Okay.
If you have the water half, you could say half glass filled or half empty.
Yeah.
Isn't it right? So the Western media always see Nigeria, Africa, and some of the activities in Africa as half empty, but we see it as half full. Before the president took the oath of office, knew the situation in Nigeria.
And you made it
Absolutely.
worse.
I mean, come on. It's in the interest of loving Nigeria that we have to keep it real. If you're going to do an interview with Mehdi Hasan, you have to have your facts. And I'll be struggling. The one thing you will never have to fight too hard to defend in life is the truth. What kind of weak cliche illustration was that? We're talking about people's lives and you're going to bring out a glass of water?
Oh,
There is no
yeah.
government on earth.
How do we stop that? Okay, there we go. Yeah, so that was a big story throughout last week. If you're on social media, there's no way you would have missed this interview. I want to recommend that you go watch the full interview on YouTube, but I also want to say, please don't watch the full interview on YouTube. No, I'm kidding. But you should watch it because beyond just Nigeria, this is a bigger reflection on the state of things in Africa. And it's what happens with our leaders. I want to point out, because obviously I'm more familiar with the Nigerian scene. I do want to point out that Daniel Bwala, who is an aide to the Nigerian President Tinubu, in interviews with journalists, he gets combative. He gets defensive. He goes beyond that interview. He goes from TV to other platforms. I'm talking social media platforms, and continues the combat with his journalists. So he comes for them. You know what I mean? Like, he's going to check you. I mean, he can be quite convincing. Don't get me wrong. He has a way with words. But obviously, like I said, when it comes to truth, when it comes to facts, and when it comes to fiction, it's only so much you can do, regardless of how great of a speaker you are. And to be on a global stage and have someone like Mehdi Hasan ask these questions, and some people have tried to make it an issue, the style of his questioning, and Bwala himself has even argued that Al Jazeera did not prepare him enough. They didn't send him questions. You want them to send you questions to answer. If you're defending the truth, why do you need to see what the questions will be? Is it to give you enough time to prepare your lies, or whatever is the case? But it just was a very interesting juxtaposition when you think of how this man responds to journalists, and dare I say, how our leaders respond to journalists on the continent, how they treat our own people, our own journalists, and how they respond abroad when you cannot argue with facts. Mehdi Hasan is not in any way Nigerian. The platform was not a Nigerian platform, definitely not a Western media platform, as Bwala tried to suggest. And of course, Mehdi Hasan corrected him. But yeah, that did happen. And if you have the chance, go watch the full interview. It will blow your mind. because that clip I responded to, I hadn't even seen the full interview, and I had that response. And when I saw the full interview after that clip, and my mind was blown even bigger than it was that time, you know, that just from that one clip that I saw. But anyway, moving on to just, you know, headlines happening throughout Africa. In your own time, you can do more research on that to see exactly what's going on. Ghana is granting citizenship to 150 people. I know at one point they paused the interview. I mean, the citizenship they were given, I think we covered something like that. And now they're granting citizenship to 150 people. I'm sure Joe has talked about this. You can check out his other lives because he's very familiar with the citizenship path in Ghana, at least much more familiar than I am. And if you have any interest in that or to see how that works, you can go check out Joe's lives. And if you want us to talk about that at some point, please comment below and I'll let him know so that we, you know, go into more details on that. Great news on the continent. Miami Heat center Bam Adebayo delivered a historic performance by scoring 83 points in a 151-29 victory over the Washington Wizards. He's part of the Miami Heat. This man actually made history. I think he's only the second person in history to have this many points in one night in a 151-29 victory over Washington Wizards. That is amazing news. Another thing that happened, another Nigerian bodybuilder, Chinedu Andrew Obieka. I'm sorry, Obieka. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Please forgive me if I didn't. He won the Arnold Classic. The Arnold Classic is a bodybuilding competition that's obviously organized by Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was a massive bodybuilder before he went into acting and even politics. But Chinedu took home a massive $750,000 prize after such an incredible performance. I mean, I was watching this man flexing his muscles like, he really did his thing and definitely deserved that win. And it was so interesting how during his interview, he said, oh, that's not a lot of money, you know, and then he started saying all these really inspirational things about things that are actually important in life. And I found a lot of inspiration in that. And there was one comment on the platform that posted that video that I saw that I wrote, wow, imagine if this was his full-time job, because he was only doing this as a passion, he said. He was just doing it on the side. And to win something like that effortlessly is very impressive. There's a documentary on Arnold Schwarzenegger's story on Netflix that I saw some of it. I haven't finished it, but just to see his history as a bodybuilder and how he was so interested in that, it was very interesting, you know, watching somebody else, well, specifically from the African continent, also embodying that and walking that same path. I just thought it was really interesting. In Guinea, the president has been missing for weeks. Mamadi Doumbouya, of course, his aides have said, you know, he went maybe for some quick medical check or something. You know how these things go, where our leaders disappear for weeks. We've had, I mean, at one point in Nigeria, for instance, not to make it about Nigeria again, but at one point in Nigeria, both the president and vice president were not even in the country. And it's like, who is leading the nation right now? Do you get what I'm saying? But this tends to happen more than it should, which is actually disheartening, where our leaders just disappear. What we would like to work with is transparency. Transparency, keep it real. Perhaps you're trying to hide the fact that maybe you're not in great health, perhaps, but at least be more transparent than not. You know, for leaders disappearing, it's not news in Africa, but it should not be okay. Cocoa price crash is hurting West African farmers. We just thought we should put that out. FYI, let's do what we can to support our cocoa farmers. Of course, we know even though the demand for chocolate globally may have reduced or cooled down some, and that's part of what is actually causing a ripple effect. And of course, with what's going on now in the Middle East, we know that could actually heighten it. But just keep these West African farmers in your thoughts. ShopRite shut down operations in Nigeria. This one was very scary, really sad. And again, there are things going on globally that we might say, you know, we have no control over. It will affect all countries, but Nigeria in particular is just the economic reality. This is a reflection of the economic reality. ShopRite is a South African franchise, and they did really well in Nigeria. They were very popular. I know when I was in Nigeria, it was probably the store I went to the most. Very convenient, you know. It's almost like the business model of stores that you would see in the West. And I'm not necessarily saying that to reduce or take away from from African stores, but they had that edge because, you know, at the end of the day, there was some quality there. And for them to be, and of course, they also had their drawbacks. They also had their controversies around, like GMO produce and things like that. I think I need to mention that for balance. But they've shut down, which is, again, a reflection of the economic reality, regardless of what people like Daniel Boala like to say. Finally, in Tanzania, Burundian refugees are being forced to return home. Reportedly, homes, churches have been shut down and refugees have been asked to go back home. The United Nations has explained how this is not okay. And obviously, just even looking at it, even from a superficial level, just looking at it literally, it just doesn't look okay. Having these refugees being kicked out, who moved to Tanzania for different reasons, avoiding conflict and things like that. And for that to be happening is just very concerning. But anyway, that's it for news around Africa. Please ensure that you like, share, subscribe, comment. The email list that Joe pointed out is still being displayed, but you can go into the comments so you can copy and paste that link directly. I think you should be able to copy and paste, but get that link and, respond to it so that we can build our own thing. In case you missed it, we talked about African Lens being shut down. We've talked about how African Stream was shut down years ago, and, the effect of that. And at the end of the day, we just need to build our own thing, and having an email list is one step towards that. But I appreciate you all tuning in. You can follow Authentic African on all platforms. I am at the Gloria Ayo on all platforms. I also have a network that I'm putting together called Diaspora Station. You should follow that as well. Like, share, subscribe, comment on this post. That way you help us get our stories out there. African stories need to be told now more than ever before. And we'll see you next week, same time. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful rest of the week. We appreciate you. Bye-bye.